Last time, we looked over the great endeavor to build Final Fantasy VII on the Sony PlayStation after rejecting the idea of making it for the Nintendo 64, going on to decide whether to use pre-rendered backgrounds versus 3D environments, the creation of FMV cutscenes to work around the PlayStation's limitations, along with a horde of cut and altered maps, materials, and many other related elements, while also building the game's iconic soundtrack via the PlayStation's internal sound system. But now, as development is speeding to the finish line, decisions are being made on if certain elements should stay into the final game, let alone troubled localization that even threatens to cut out an entire iconic section of the game for being too raunchy. And so today on Gaming History, in the final of this 3-part special, we shall explore the history and beta unused content of Final Fantasy VII. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button and hit the like button too to further support us and keep creating new videos. As the clock ticked to the release date of 1996, the team had to adjust and cut down some ideas. This firstly affecting Vincent, Valentine, and Yuffie, who were being made with the intention of being encountered as part of the story, but had to be pushed into becoming optional characters and not required as a part of the main narrative anymore. This was to the point of even an alternate FMV ending that they were producing. Initially, it was to include both Yuffie and Vincent, but as they were optional now, that original one was scrapped, and a version was made without them. Plans did exist for an alternate version of the FMV for if you had unlocked Yuffie and or Vincent, but with how long the final cutscene is, it would require an additional 4th disc at that point, and thus was scrapped. But aside from that cut, further polish was being given to the game, including the battle UI that originally had more information at the top of the screen was now removed, along with updating these very character models, especially Cloud's, whose Buster Sword saw one last revision to become even bigger and his hair getting spikier. The end screen, which originally used 2D sprites exclusively made for each character, was simply changed to their official art, even redoing entire pre-rendered backgrounds in order to have the camera readjusted like for the opening area of the bombing mission, or even remaking them when redesigning an entire area, such as the Cosmo Canyon, where it rearranged some of its huts and added ladders and further lighting, or even Nibelheim, which did a complete redesign and even added a water tower in the middle to further flesh out Tifa and Cloud's relationship. The game at this point was becoming a highly anticipated game, despite the console switch to the Sony PlayStation at the time, to the point of Squaresoft CEO Tomoyuki Takechi feeling certain about its success in Japan. As a result, a demo of the game was offered as a bundle in the fighting game called Tobal No. 1 on August 2nd, 1996 in Japan. The demo just covered the opening bombing mission, but had one major difference of letting you use Aerith in battles alongside Cloud and Barret, something that was not possible in the final game, a way of giving the players a taste of using 3 characters on screen at once. This along with several late game spells and even summons too. But that didn't stop there, as at the August Tokyo Game Show 1996 event, they also had a playable demo given out called Square's Preview Extras, Final Fantasy VII and Sigref 95 Works. A mouthful, but as the title suggests, not only was that the same playable demo of the opening bombing mission included, but as well included the original N64 demo that was shown off at Sigref 1995 for the public to own. And following that even came some early marketing of the Western version of Final Fantasy VII with the release of Tobal No. 1 in North America on August 31st, 1996, which carried that same Aerith demo. But the game, while getting close to completion, still needed further polishing, and so it was agreed to push the game's release date back to January 31st, 1997. During the game's development, the game was seeing a bit of risque content added. This scenario was being written by event planner Motomu Toriyama. Toriyama was already an individual responsible for much of the early Midgar sections of the game, including the bombing mission that followed the Sector 7 plate, and this section called the Honeybee Inn. The section itself was literally about a red light district and a full-on brothel, going as far as to even include Cloud in drags as a means to infiltrate it. However, with how sleazy this section was becoming, staff were starting to raise a brow with how far Toriyama was taking this. Eventually, he was told that that's going too far. But instead of removing that section, it was to be toned down and made more ambiguous on being a brothel. Initially, the Honeybee Inn had 2 floors, with the first floor cut out and the second becoming the default floor, with the employee room replacing one of the rooms in the second floor. And the reason why the first floor was cut was entirely because that is where the extreme scenarios that Toriyama had written took place. On entry to the original first floor, it is very explicit that it is a brothel, with pictures of women on the wall, note Tifa being a part of that selection too, and a selection for how long you want to be with one of these women, including a 30-minute course and a crazy long 150-minute course. Of course, the game actually allowed you to line up, whereby one sees all the scenarios of each bee coming out for the next customer in a very seductive manner, speaking in very colorful text. The first guy simply passing out from a floating kiss, where Cloud simply shrugs. The next scenario would involve Shinra executive Palmer coming over for another course, as the regular customer that he apparently is, which goes on to him having an interaction with the Shinra employee in front of Cloud, scolding him for even just coming to the place, leading to Palmer chasing out that very employee. This scenario also features a piece of music that was exclusively used here, that went unused as such once the scenario was cut out, and afterwards Cloud is let in and into the second floor, whereby we get the map that becomes the first floor in the final game. There were also 2 other floors in the first floor too related to this. The first one on the left simply involves the girls coming out, making that the employee room. The other on the right is the waiting area for, of course, all the men waiting for their courses. Even a character named Quedge, who was supposed to be Wedge's brother, all nervous as he could be. The second floor, while it contained much of the same rooms, the 2 rooms on the right are locked and contains only 3 rooms, which the final game simply duplicated 2 of the rooms to cover the 2 other doors. Altogether though, with being this raunchy, it was cut down and believed by the team to now be in a more presentable state for the final game. And so the game released on that very date on January 31st, 1997. Up to this point, the PlayStation had been lagging behind the N64, but that changed as Final Fantasy VII became its de facto killer app, having a 50% attach rate at selling 2 million copies to 4 million PlayStation owners at the time in just a span of 3 days, selling PlayStations out in Japan in fact leading up to the game's release. And of course, not just was it a commercial success, but a critical one too, with Famitsu magazine even giving it a very solid 38 out of 40 score. While it was an obvious success in Japan, North America was going to be another beast, with Squaresoft's lack of any major success there. At the time, Sony, who was also struggling against the Nintendo 64 and to an extent the Sega Saturn North America, saw the potential of Final Fantasy VII and how it could become the PlayStation's very killer app to overcome this competition. As a result, Sony made a deal with Square to publish this game on their behalf and even offer them royalties equal to what they would have received if they self-published. And so the development of the Western version of Final Fantasy VII was underway. For this, Squaresoft decided to start fresh and shut down their offices in Washington and open up a new office in Costa Mesa, California. Originally, the translator of Final Fantasy VI, or known as 3 in North America at the time, Ted Woosley, was invited to continue his role on the next entry, a localizer well known for his memorable quotes, such as Kefka's "son of a submariner." However, he turned it down due to personal reasons. So producer Hironobu Sakaguchi proposed that the game's English translation to be done in-house by the original Japanese team. What happened instead was a collaboration between the publisher Sony Computer Entertainment America and Squaresoft working jointly to localize. The localization was as such being handled by SCEA's associate producer Seth Luisi, starting with bringing in a team of 50 people for localizing it, with Michael Baskett, a recurring translator at Square, who was the director of localization for Chrono Trigger as well, but there were mistakes. Nothing is wrong with Michael Basket himself, but he literally was the only translator in-house. Even though he was still receiving assistance from Japanese staff too, the team was struggling due to the number of inexperienced localizers or even professional editors on board. This leading to badly translated dialogue that was grammatically terrible, let alone a number of dialogue just not having the correct meaning, or dialogue being completely rewritten at times to something incomprehensible. A lot of this was also due to the heavy technical issues that they were facing with the engine coded to basically just work in Japanese, leading the team to recode the engine to have more character limits to ease it off, but even then, they still couldn't program it to spell check, as it wasn't programmed to cache English words and needed to be done manually. This along with the terrible communication overall between Squaresoft American and Japanese offices, leading to meanings of certain names being lost in translation, most famously the name Aerith, which a Japanese team intended to be just that, as a combination of the name air and earth, something that fits Aerith's whole motif and character. Instead, it was translated to the more literal common Western name, Eris. Luisi during this process noted how tough it was for properly translating direct Japanese to English and making it sound natural, and so in an unconventional attempt of making sentences sound more natural, they decided to add a lot of swearing, as they felt it would better convey the Japanese meaning. Of course, you can't just drop in F-bombs in what was being aimed at a teen-rated game. As such, those words had to appear censored on screen while still looking like they were swearing. For that, they used a classic comic book style swearing, whereby they replaced a word with several symbols. On the flip side, the European version wasn't even being handled by Squaresoft nor Sony, but rather given to a third party to handle, and was in even worse condition. While the localization was a nightmare, it was however receiving additional content. These included some simple stuff like a more cleaned up UI in menu screens, rebalancing enemies such as Gin Natak becoming immune to sleep and poison, along with less encounter rates, as well as bigger changes like new cutscenes, including flashback cutscenes of Zack and Cloud together to further flesh out that story, along with a new boss battle against Diamond Weapon, who originally only appeared in a cutscene. This along with two new bosses that appear in Disc 3 called Emerald Weapon and Ruby Weapon, which together with Emerald Weapon came the new underwater materia to remove the timer for the Emerald Weapon underwater battle. Otherwise, several other miscellaneous changes were being made, such as simplifying the clock puzzle from the Temple of the Ancients. With localization well underway, Seth Luisi's other task was the marketing for the game. Firstly, it was decided that this time, that despite it being only the fourth entry released outside of Japan, Final Fantasy VII was to keep its numeric number 7. Unlike the previous entries like 4 becoming 2 and 6 becoming 3, it was all consistent now. But the bigger task that Luisi set out to do was deemed as the impossible: make a JRPG sell in North America, a feat that was never achieved prior, as it was a rather niche genre up to that point, with expectations for the game only being at between 30,000 to 50,000 units selling. And with that, Square and Sony launched a massive 3-month campaign in August 1997, running commercials alongside major TV programs, including The Simpsons and SNL, let alone a ton of adverts and articles published via gaming magazines and comics. This followed up by various collaborations with various brands, including Pepsi and even Zippo Lighter, as well as giving out a second playable demo for the game via PlayStation Underground magazine. It was a lot like the original demo packed with Tobal number 1 that featured Aerith, but instead had Tifa for the opening bombing mission. But the game saw its true showcase at E3 1997, showing a new trailer and even another playable demo, this one actually being based off the final game, with only Cloud and Barret alone being playable in the bombing mission. While all was going well in building hype for the game, Sony was getting nervous about one particular piece of content in the game, the Honeybee Inn. At the time, during localization of a game in the West, it was the norm to change content of the game that was deemed too sensitive for Westerners, and Sony had set its eye on that very brothel. Despite already being toned down by the developers, as they even thought it was going too far, it wasn't enough for Sony as the game's publisher. In an announcement, it was announced that the Honeybee Inn might very well get cut for the Western release. This did not sit well with Western fans, leading to Sony being piled with numerous long letters, petitions, and even being hit over the head with the right of free speech mentioned in the First Amendment. Sony Sony, playing Damage Control, tried to state that no actual decision had been made, but couldn't deny a change was proposed. But eventually, Sony backpedaled, and Squaresoft firmly stated that they never allow Sony to censor their game. And so the Honey Bee Inn survived into the Western game, and thus the game remained uncut for release. And so at long last, Final Fantasy VII released on September 7, 1997 in North America, and with how much Sony had banked on it, it truly paid off, selling a whopping 330,000 copies in just its opening weekend, becoming the game with the best opening weekend yet at the time, trumping even Star Fox 64, who held the title previously at 300,000 copies sold in its opening weekend. And the game went on to sell 1 million copies by December 1997, and bigger yet is that this became the very game to make the PlayStation finally overtake the Nintendo 64 in North America. And of course, critical reception was incredibly high with this game, scoring many perfect and near perfect scores across the board. Some publications, including GameFan, would even declare it as quite possibly the greatest game ever made, something that would even make it onto the back of the game's box. Others, such as GameSpot, highlighting its feat in bringing together gameplay, technology, and storytelling so well, while those of Edge magazine specifically bringing up how its story, being as good and complex as it was, brought it as close as possible to becoming an interactive movie. Final Fantasy VII had done what no other Final Fantasy game, or JRPG for that matter, could, becoming a true success in the West. While it had a ludicrous $20 million ad campaign in North America, while Japan and Europe only saw $10 million spent apiece, it had paid off with flying colors. The success of the Western version of Final Fantasy VII led to a re-release of Final Fantasy VII in Japan on October 2nd, 1997, called Final Fantasy VII International, which would, as the title states, use the international Western version as a basis and include all its updates, including the new boss fights, cutscenes, and other updates, but as well a new fourth disc called Final Fantasy VII Perfect Files that included many small extras, from concept art to character info, maps, and much more. This shortly being followed by the European release on November 17, 1999, and interestingly, a PC version in 1998 developed by Eidos, which the PC version fixed many translation errors and even badly translated dialogue, this together with some reshading of the game and even giving characters the mouth graphic that was cut for the PlayStation release, for better or for worse. As the years went by, the Final Fantasy series kept going with its hot new popularity worldwide, coming out with many more entries over the years, and eventually a movie that would follow up on Final Fantasy VII called Advent Children, launching a new compilation of Final Fantasy VII sub-series, whereby many new spin-off games would come out for Final Fantasy VII alone, from prequels to sequels. And eventually a tech demo built for the PlayStation 3 was shown off, showcasing the opening of Final Fantasy VII with the PlayStation 3's graphical fidelity, exploding demands for a remake of Final Fantasy VII in such graphics, something that would eventually be fulfilled down the road in a 3-part remake of the series. And thank you so much for watching this 3-part series on Final Fantasy VII to completion. Hit the subscribe button for I'll plan to be back for more Final Fantasy and other games cut content and gaming history soon. Hit the like button and comment below on if you experienced that hype for the game in 1997 or if you wish you would have. So everyone, thank you for watching.